And I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for this 18 minutes Chai. And how amazing that we're doing it in the Chai year of the Garden Shul, which is our 180th year. And before we get into the Mishna of Pirkei Avot that we're learning today, fascinating Mishna, and it is incredible how Hashem works. The Bashert in tonight's Mishnah, as you'll see, it's just phenomenal. But I just want to first say, welcome Amir, that today's shir is dedicated in honor of the late beloved Eric Samson, Israel ben David, who we know, of course, one of the pillars, doyens, every possible word, what he's been and continues to be for the South African Jewish community and beyond. And I have the most special memories of Eric celebrating the bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvah of two of his grandsons and one granddaughter at the Garden Shul, as many of you were there as we celebrated with him and the family. And I hope and I pray that our shiur today will bring elevation to his holy neshama. And a big yasher koach to the family, the late Eric Samson's family, for honoring his legacy in a way that communities all around the world are learning Pirkei Avot, learning ethics of the fathers, and all of the wonderful teachings that are contained within them. And really, it's such a special zchut and merit to their late husband, father, grandfather's neshama, and a testament to the mishpacha. And as I said earlier, every shiur is special. Every shiur that's taken place for the late Eric Samson, of course, is special. But this one has such an amazing element of hashkacha pratit, of divine providence. Now, we're going to still get to it in a moment, but I do want to say that what makes this shiur very special for Eric is that, speaking to the family, Eric loved Pesach. And this morning, Dorothy was telling me that, how the families have the best memories from Pesach. For Eric, it was always a time of reflection. He loved to make speeches of gratitude at the Seder table, and the speeches that carried themes around the ledor vador, generations sitting together, the story, the baton being passed down to the next generation, the link that was being added to and strengthened. And just also, Frankie was telling me as well about how the family went for many years to Israel, celebrating Pesach together. And Eric loved having all of his grandchildren and his children at the Seder table. And as Dorothy said, he always gave a speech, and just very special memories that the family holds so dear. And he had a lot of joy from the grandchildren. They used to dress up and they used to perform plays about Pharaoh and Moses and all the plagues. And just the traditions, the Pesach traditions, all the Jewish traditions are very dear to his heart. So therefore, having this shiur for the late Eric on Pesach has an extra significance. And I also want to tell you why I thought this was so bashered. And I found this to be so extraordinary and remarkable, was that originally when Bianca asked me to, and Bianca's with us, she's the one who's facilitating with the various rabbis giving these shiurim, and she asked if I would teach chapter 2, Mishnah 5. And then she said, there's a bit of a misunderstanding that was already taught. We're going to do chapter 2, Mishnah 6. And of course, for me, that was okay, bashert. Obviously, that's the mission that we're meant to speak, meant to teach. What's interesting, there's also a difference in tradition as to how we number the various Mishnas of Pirkei Avot. So I went with the way that it is in many traditions, and based on the source sheet we're going to use tonight, which is from Sefaria.com, which is the resource that has so much of the Torah online, and we often use as our source sheet. And what is so amazing is that this Mishnah that we're learning on Pesach is the one Mishnah that, according to the grandson of Maimonides of the Rambam, has a reference to Pharaoh. Because if I asked you, where do you find Pharaoh in Pirkei Avot? You would say, what do you mean, Pharaoh in Pirkei Avot? Where do we see Paroi from the Egypt story in Pirkei Avot? But actually, it is in this Mishnah chosen for Pesach that there is a reference to Pharaoh. And so many teachings around that, a fabulous and powerful Kabbalistic teaching. And of course, tomorrow night, Shvi Shel Pesach, and Friday, we're going to read the Shirat Hayam in Shul. As the Jewish people crossed the sea on dry land, they sang the Shira, the song of praise and gratitude, Az Yashir Moshe. And what do we read about in this Pirkei Avot, as I'm going to show you in a second, the Mishnah we're going to learn together, is a story of Pharaoh drowning. The consequences that the Egyptians suffered. And this is where the day before, when the story is going to be read in Shul, it's remarkable. You'll see in a second when I show you the reference sheet. So let us learn the Mishnah together. The Mishnah, I'm going to show you my screen, so please look towards the screen for those of you who are by the screen. It is the teaching before this one, the great sage Hillel, like Hillel and Shammai. Hillel, who was known for his patience, for his humility, as we find throughout the Talmud, particularly there's a section in Tractate Shabbat which highlights phenomenal stories, inspiring stories of Hillel's patience and his humility. So he's giving a series of teachings, and then we come to the sixth Mishnah. Look at the screen now as I share you with my screen. Look on the top, how Pharaoh pops his head into Pirkei Avot, Shiur, in honor of the late beloved Eric Samson, Israel ben David, Zechrono Levracha. Okay, so here we go. Second chapter, sixth teaching. Moreover, he, referring to Hillel, saw a skull floating on the face of the water. Amar la, he said to it, Al da'ateift atfuch, because you drowned others, they drowned you. V'sof metefayech yitufun. And in the end, they that drowned you will be drowned. That is the Mishnah. A basic teaching about every action has a reaction. Every cause has an effect that then becomes a cause and that becomes an effect. Right? All the cause and effects that take place when we do something, we must never think that it's an isolated act. Every act has a reaction. And that story of Hillel, where he sees the skull floating in the water, he says, why are you floating in the water? Because you drowned someone else, you yourself were drowned, and the person who drowned you will be drowned himself. So we have this sort of divine judgment, you can even say retribution, but divine justice. Now, according to the Rambam's grandson, as I mentioned earlier, that skull that Hillel saw floating in the water was none other than the skull of Pharaoh. It was Pharaoh's head. The same Pharaoh who decreed that the baby boys should be thrown into the Nile River. And now, all these years later, the justice that is being served. Now, according to the Arizal, the famous 16th century Kabbalist, listen to this. There was a spark that Hillel, the Arizal talks about Gilgulim, like the reincarnations, how people can have different elements from other people's souls. People could be reincarnated. According to the Arizal, the sage Hillel, his soul contained the spark of the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses himself. And like I said earlier, like the Torah tells us that Moshe was the most humble man on the face of the earth, Hillel too had this incredible humility. And once again, generations later, as the Arizal is teaching us, Hillel, i.e. Moshe, Moses, is confronting the skull in the water, which is Pharaoh. How remarkable is that teaching? It applies in the negative and the positive, by the way. We do, God forbid, a transgression, and there is consequences. Ultimately, we may not see it immediately, but eventually it happens. But the same is with a mitzvah. That we must never think that we do a mitzvah in isolation, and what cause does it have? Does it really make a difference? It can be now, a minute, a day, a week, a month, a year. Every action has a reaction. Now, here's an interesting question that the commentaries ask. If you look at this teaching again, I'm going to show you the screen. Look at your screen again as I show you the teaching from Hillel. Moreover, he saw a skull floating on the face of the water. He said to it, he said to the skull, because you drowned others, they drowned you, and in the end, they that drowned you will be drowned. Now, what is the point of Hillel rebuking a dead person who can no longer rectify his deeds? The person's no longer alive. Isn't it too late? This is a question that the commentaries ask. And the Kabbalists give a powerful explanation. They say that when Hillel saw Pharaoh's skull floating towards him, he realized that it was time for Pharaoh to finally find peace after all these years. He therefore used Pharaoh to derive a lesson, in that way bringing merit to him, because he was used now as a subject for a teaching, and allowing his soul to finally find peace. But here we come to a deeper philosophical question about this whole midrash. If the person drowned others and therefore deserving to be drowned, why is the person then who will drown him considered responsible? It was coming to him, as they say. He was deserving of it. Why is he being punished? So I want to repeat that question. You have person A who drowned person B. So Hillel sees the skull of person B floating on the river. He says, you're floating on the river because you drowned person A. Therefore, you were deserving of it, person B. And the person C who drowned you, they too will be drowned. But why? If person B was deserving of being drowned, why is person C going to face consequences for drowning person B? It's a similar question that can be asked about Pharaoh in Egypt and all the Egyptians. According to the Midrash, already before we went down to Egypt to be slaves, it was destined. At the Brit Bein HaBesarim, at the covenant between the parts, God, according to the Midrash, I don't have time to get into it now, God gave Abraham a choice, how his descendants should be refined, and he chose the slavery for 400 years. So why are the Egyptians being punished? It was destined that the Jews were to be enslaved to the Egyptians. Why did they? And it comes to that fundamental question of destiny and choice. And what are we or are we not responsible for? Now, we have another 3 minutes, although we didn't start on time. So obviously in 3 minutes, we're not going to answer this existential question. But I want to just give you a thought. Now I'm going to end up with a powerful story and a teaching from Kohelet, and then we'll bring that home to wrap up. We'll see if we can do that in the next 3 minutes. Probably unlikely, but let's try. So it's a very powerful question. In the Haggadah that we read last week, this week, early in the week, Friday night and Motzei Shabbat, one of the passages started off, Vayoreyu otanu hamitzrim. The Egyptians did badly to us. I see Nathan nodding your head. You remember that passage. Now, actually, the correct terminology, the correct grammar should be Vayoreu lanu hamitzrayim. The Egyptians did badly lanu to us. Vayoreu otanu, and I see Amir is still with us. He could tell you from Hebrew grammar. Vayoreu otanu is they made us bad, so to speak. That's not how the English Haggadah will translate it, because it's trying to say how they did badly to us. But if you look at the word literally, they made us bad. What does that mean? And in fact, the way it's explained is that, as many of us know, that the 49 days of the Omer is to rectify the Jewish people when the 49th level of impurity in Egypt, one more moment, and they wouldn't have left Egypt, right? They had to rectify, they had to leave straight away spiritually. They were on a very low level. Why? Because the Egyptians, in addition to enslaving us, also, and there's many references to this, we don't have time to go through now, also try to damage us spiritually, to lower us spiritually. So they did badly to us physically and also spiritually. For that, that's where the consequences come in. God could sometimes give you circumstances that are destined, but you have a choice how you are going to deal with those circumstances. Does the person have to be enslaved by you? And even if they do, how are you going to be as a slave master? It was the extra cruelty, the extra level of depravity, the fact that physically and spiritually, the Egyptians did whatever they could to undermine the Jewish identity and people and experience. That's where the consequences come in. Because maybe they were destined to be there at that time, but how they responded to it, that extra level of enjoyment from being the taskmaster, the slave master. Did they just do it because they had to, or was there that sadistic element to it, God forbid? That's where the punishment comes in. And that's what Hillel is saying. God has many messengers. If that person B is deserving of that consequence, person C didn't have to be the person. The reason why person C was the God's tool for person P to face that consequence is because person C obviously was not, that person C themselves must have had some sort of deficiency to be that person and to choose to be that person, to do that to person B. So much is determined in advance and destined. But your emotions, your feelings, the way that you go about something, how you choose to do something, whether or not ultimately you're the one that does it, that's all choice. True, it's destined for that thing to happen, but how it happens and who it happens through. So these are, again, this is a big discussion. I'm just giving a thought to help us understand it. The commentaries do talk about it in the context of this Mishnah, but it's a great philosophical perspective on living life. There are consequences. There is divine justice. There is the free choice of how we choose to respond to life's circumstances. And I want to end off with the teaching from Kohelet, authored by the wisest of men, King Solomon. Chapter 11, verse 1, Shlach lachmecha al pnei hamayim ki berov hayamim timtzo'ena, cast thy bread upon the waters, for after many days you will surely find it. This is a verse that is in the context of charity, of tzedakah. And if you look at your screen now, we're going to read it together inside. If you look here. Shlach lachmecha Kohelet 11, Ecclesiastes Send your bread, cast thy bread forth upon the waters, for after many days you will find it. Who throws bread on the water? What does this mean? Our sages interpret this in the context of charity, that you think you give charity and there's no return. When you give charity, you will always one day, there will be reward. It will come back round as the wheel turns, just like Hillel was telling this skull. And look what the Midrash says, and I translated it based on the Midrash, but also I added a little section in, if you look here from Rashi in the end. Look what the Mishna says, Midrash says, Shmot Rabbah. This is on the verse, and Yitro heard, from when Yitro heard in Pashat Yitro, how he then came to the desert and he joined the Jewish people as a convert. This is what the verse means, cast thy bread upon the waters, for after many days you will surely find it. Are men so foolish as to throw bread upon water? Rather, the verse is to be understood allegorically, to refer to one like Jethro, who told his daughters to invite Moshe, whom he thought was an Egyptian and whom he never expected to see again, to dinner. It turned out that Moshe became his son-in-law and eventually brought Jethro to join him, with Jethro's descendants later serving in the Sanhedrin, as Rashi says. I have a fabulous joke to share with you, but I don't have time to do that, about the guy on the train with a watch. And he says, why can't you tell me the time? He says, there's a whole story. He says, you'll end up marrying my daughter, sort of thing. You may have heard that story, but this is what happened there. Yitro invited Moshe over to the house to have dinner, not expecting, he thought he was a random Egyptian. Thought he would see him once. The Midrash says, and look what happened. That one act of kindness ended up becoming his son-in-law, ended up transforming and elevating Jethro's entire life and the entire family, changing history forever. Shlach lach mechal pnei hamayim. Cast your bread on the waters. Do that act of charity, that good deed. It will come back to you. If not today, then tomorrow, then one day. We don't do it for that reason. But ultimately, that is one of the principles, one of the paradoxical, dialectical principles of life. That when we give, we end up getting back in return. In fact, why this is the analogy used, the commentaries explain, is because as the bread goes down the water, you don't see who's later going to pick it up. That's one of the highest levels of charity, when the giver and the recipient don't know each other's identity. But I want to finish with a story. Load shedding in 6 minutes, and I'm past the 18 minutes, but we started a bit late, so you guys can give me 18 minutes JMT Jewish Mean Time. Okay, I'm going to end off now with a story. You may have heard this story before. It's a rabbi in Germany, and he used to go on a walk every morning, and every morning he would see the same German fellow, and he would say, good morning, good morgen, Herr Müller. His name was Herr Müller. Good morning, Herr Müller. Good morning. Every day he would nod back to the rabbi, good morning, rabbi, whatever. It's a daily ritual. That was their discipline, their schedule. And he would see him, and greet him back. Then the 30s, the late 30s, all of the tragedies associated with that, all of the events unfold. And as you know, the Nazi party takes over and this and that, the rabbi would still see Herr Müller, and he would still nod to him, but Herr Müller wouldn't necessarily respond. But he acknowledged the rabbi, or he shook his head, or he looked at him, whatever. But every morning he would still, good morning, Herr Müller. Anyway, eventually the rabbi, unfortunately, sadly, tragically, round up together with so many other Jews and was sent off to the camps. We all know what happened in the camps. The doctor was there, Mengel and others. And they would right and left. Right, I don't remember, I think right was to the gas chambers, left was to work. And this rabbi was in that line. And he was waiting for his turn. This rabbi was not particularly fit. And who knows, he could easily have ended up whether it was to the left, to the gas chambers, or maybe the right was the gas chambers, the left was to work. And finally, it was the rabbi's turn. And the rabbi looks at the Nazi officer in the eyes, and he says to him, as he looks at his face, "Good morgen, Herr Müller." It was that same man. And Herr Müller looked at him, and he said, "To the right, to work." And it saved this rabbi's life. One good morning, one smile. Shlach lachmecha pnei hamayim ki beroiv hayomim timtzoena. Or timotzena. Send out, cast your bread on the waters. Give that smile. Give of yourself. Do that one act. You never know after many days what impact that has on you and on others. And this is the theme of this Mishna 2, chapter 2, Mishna 6, which Hillel is teaching us this concept in the negative, but also in the positive. And I wanted to finish the shiur quoting this verse because of Kohelet and this Mishnah, because it highlights the blessing that was Eric Samson's life. A man who, as we all know, Eric was a man who sent the bread down the waters. Always, every day, with a smile. He had an open and generous heart, which was incredible. The results that we continue seeing today. Please God, he has his life and legacy that will live, please God, for generations. And please God, in the merit of people like Israel ben David and all of his tzedakah and chesed, and in the merit of the tzedakah and chesed of the family, like Hillel said to Paro, but in a positive sense. May you who did good, may all the good just come to you. May Eric's family only know of nechama, comfort, healing, and blessing as Eric's flame continues to shine brightly through them and through all of his chesed throughout his life. And may his neshama continue to be a source of bracha and blessing to all of us who were such blessed recipients of so much of the chesed. His family, his community, Israel, the entire world. And ultimately, may we, and this is the biggest gift we can give to someone, to follow in his way. If we all, tonight, tomorrow, sometime this Pesach, don't send the bread on the waters because it's Pesach. Send the matzah. Shlach matzah, I don't know. Send your matzah on the waters. Do that act of love and kindness. Even if it's just a good morning, a smile, an act of tzedakah, of charity and chesed. And through that, in Eric's merit, may we all be blessed with a chag, kasher, the sameach, with power, with energy. Please God, I mean, we're about to lose it in about 1 minute, but thank you all for joining us. I did get a request to count the Omer. I have already counted the Omer in Shul, but if we can just say it together with me, I would say the bracha, and you can, I won't say Hashem's name. I wonder if there's anyone who's still saying the bracha who wants to lead us. Last night was the 4th day of the Omer. So just say with me, Hayom. Yeah, you can repeat. Hayom, Chamisha, Yamim, LaOmer, Harachaman, Hu Yachzeh Lana Avodah Beit HaMikdash, V'mkoma, B'mher V'yameinu, Amen, Selah. And please God, it's 8 o'clock. Lights haven't gone off. But thank you one and all for joining us.